place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, September 15, 2025. This is episode 1081 of Living Free in Tennessee. And it's kind of a weird day to be back at it after that weekend. And I didn't have a Friday show. And some things have happened. And if you're on my email list, we sent out an email on September 11th about the Charlie Kirk assassination. And it actually caused some people to unsubscribe from that email. It caused some people to send me some angry things, but mostly it caused people sent me notes saying thank you for talking about unity instead of talking about division as a result of that. So this may be a very different take on any of that. And I was, Sue Zoldak said online, hey, pick me if you're going to do a show about this. And I thought, well, this would be perfect because Sue has worked in PR for many, many years, and she's quite good at it. So seeing her take on that would be great. So that's what we're going to do today after our usual Monday segments. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about our featured event of today's show. And that is the Small Motors Maintenance and Repair class, which is this Saturday at the Holler Hub in Lancaster, Tennessee. $50 gets you the class and lunch, and I'm making you lunch. So I'll sit with you and have lunch too. That's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. If you want to sign up, just grab your ticket now. I also have two sponsors to thank. The first sponsor is agoristaxadvice.com. Matthew Sursley from agoristaxadvice.com does a few things, but something he does really well is help educate people on different tax write-offs that they can take. And you can get that for free at agoristaxadvice.com/LFTN. Sign up for his email. And you can download a guide of basic business expenses, especially if you're just starting a business. Get that done. And you just think about what you should be tracking, because he talks about how to track things, in what case you can use a write-off, in what case you can't. And that's pretty awesome. But he can also analyze all of your money coming in, money going out, and look at it and say, you know what, it'd be better if you structure yourself this way. And that is a service he offers. agoristaxadvice.com. And of course, last year he did tax filings at the beginning of the year. So I bet if you're his customer, you might also be able to have him help you with taxes depending on which state you're in. So that's always fun. All right. Our second sponsor is the Wealth Studying Podcast. John Pugliano of the Wealth Studying Podcast has been supporting us since you could support us. And his podcasts are usually about 15 minutes, and they are just about the state of the world, how it's influencing his investment decisions. And he shares everything openly. I actually just heard him on the Survival Podcast talking about nuclear power with a fellow. So he was talking about the financial investment side of that with a fellow who works in power generation. So that's actually definitely don't listen to my podcast. No, totally listen to my podcast, but also go check out what he had to say about that, because it's also interesting to think about different ways you may want to invest in just power generation and development in this country. Check it out. investablewealth.com. Click on podcast. You'll get to John Pugliano. So finally, I want to talk to you guys about something. And if you're on the video, you'll see that I am holding up handfuls of Christmas stockings. That's right. These are handfuls of Christmas stockings. We're doing a Living Free in Tennessee stocking exchange this year if you're interested in participating in it. And the idea is to keep it under $20 total for the stocking, and you sign up, and then we team you up with somebody. The sign up form asks you things like your favorite color or scents you like or don't like. And the rule will be one thing is handmade. You'll have at least one recipe that you've handwritten out, and keep it under $20. And we will have all the assignments out by about November 1st. So that you have plenty of time to find things, and then you can mail the stocking about December 1st. And in this way, everybody who wants a Christmas stocking gets a Christmas stocking. Plus, it's really fun to make stockings for people. Anyway, Margot mailed me this pile of Christmas stockings that she got on clearance last year. So if you want help staying under your $20 budget and you see me at an event like, I don't know, the small engine maintenance class that's this weekend, the biochar demo that's on Sunday, Self-Reliance Festival. Until these are gone, you can say, hey, can I have a stocking? I'm participating in the stocking exchange, and I will hand it to you, and then you don't need to buy a stocking, right? So if you want to sign up for that, go over to livingfreeintennessee.com and click on the blog post that's titled LFTN Stocking Exchange. I will add a shortcut there. We've been on the cusp of launching a new website for like 3 months. And so I keep hesitating to make any changes to the homepage, but I think I'll add that after this show before the end of the day. So you can also easily sign up for the thing, because as we post more things, that blog post like falls down. So anyway, with that, it's time for our first segment of today's show, which is Tales from the Prepper Pantry. I've got guests in town. And so we've talked about making future you happy by doing things now that may take a little extra time, but then it pays off in the future. And something I did after the cheese class, because I didn't know how much food to buy for that class, because I didn't know if we were going to have 8 people or 28 people. And so I bought for 20 people and we had 8 people. And that means we didn't use everything. So I had a lot of meats for the charcuterie platter, like cured meats. And I got the idea from Chef Ken Daniels, because he made me a cheese and meat vacuum sealed thing I could just bring somewhere and put out. And so I sliced those all up and made little kits that were in the freezer. And it's made my life a lot easier this week, because when I needed to feed people without a lot of time, because 3 weeks before Self-Reliance Festival, I'm just able to grab one of those out of the freezer, defrost it in the fridge, and it's like, here's the meat platter. And then I cut up some cheeses and I throw cucumbers in there, because we're getting cucumbers off the garden, and pickled stuff that I already have, and it's just done. So sometimes just how you package things can make your life a lot easier. I like to have ready to bake meatloaves and other things in the freezer ready to go. So I also wanted to bring up, we've been redoing the freezers and reorganizing them in advance of meat is going to be processed season, but I also have whole and half lambs available for sale. So if you're interested in any of that, Butcher Day is on October 10th, and you will choose how you want your lamb butchered at the butcher, and then you can get a whole or half animal. Half an animal, you're looking at 15 to 20 pounds. A whole animal, like of meat in your freezer, a whole animal, you're looking at anywhere from 30 to 40 pounds most of the time. So that's just for context. When you think of a whole animal and you think of a cow, that's a lot of meat. Lambs are smaller. They are smaller. And then the variety I grow are not the biggest meat sheep in the world. So we do St. Croix here. Other than that, we are gathering herbs for winter remedies and tea blends. So the goldenrod is peak ready today. I noticed when I looked out the window. So we are going to be getting our goldenrod done, and then we will dry it. And then I can make goldenrod tincture for the winter, as well as all the mints and herbs and all of those things. Right now, at this time of year, all of that stuff is super happy. The minute we get the first frost, it is a whole lot less happy. So between now and the first frost, which could happen anytime after October 1st, which is about 2.5 weeks from now, it works. If we get it after the first frost, then it's too late. So it is time to the best part about this is I get to take walks out in the yard and out in the woods looking for things to forage for the teas that we like to have in the winter. Next up, I have, so the weekly shopping report and frugality tip, I have nothing up this week. And part of that is because Sue Zoldak's going to be on, and I wanted to kind of get straight to the discussion. So my only other thing is Operation Independence, where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives. And last week, I kicked off a new resilience series. So I have a series of 4 things on how to build resilience in your life, even when times are tough. And it's called, how can we build through hard times? So we talk about creating systems over everything else and how important that is over on the blog at livingfreeintennessee.com. Why is that under Operation Independence? Because blog articles like that are things that y'all can share out to your network to kind of give people a feel of what we talk about here at Living Free in Tennessee. And it's something useful you can give them right now. And people are, there's a spirit. There's a lot of spirits of things in our culture right now that Sue and I will be talking to you about shortly. But one thing I know is a lot of people are feeling the pinch of inflation, financial pressure, automation impacting the job market, some things like that. They're feeling a little tense about money. And what better time to think about how can I be more resilient through those things than right now? So check that out. It's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. And if it resonates with you, find a friend to share it with that maybe doesn't know about living free in Tennessee. Let's bring them into the community, because this is one thing I do know about resilience. The better, stronger, and more powerful that your community is, the more likely it is that you can get through those hard times, which is probably the perfect time to bring Sue Zoldak in for our discussion today. She's like madly texting on her phone. Change the header 3 pixels to the right and make it blue, not green. I said blue, not, that's what you were texting, right?
Well, now I talk to AI and it does it for us.
That's a whole different show,
It's
Sue.
a whole different show. It's a whole different world.
Okay, before we launch in, let's give people some background on who is Zoldak, who is Sue Zoldak, and what about your background would make it a good time for me to talk to you after the Charlie Kirk assassination?
For those of you that have not seen me on the podcast, so Nicole and I have known each other for a long time, and so I think we keep saying 10 years, but we've been saying that for 5 years, so whatever that adds up to. But Nicole and I have known each other for a long time, and some of you know that Nicole used to work in policy and communications. She had her own firm, and that's how we met, and that is what I do. So I specifically have been focused on what you would call issue advocacy, which is to get people to speak up and take a part in the social discourse and vote or call their elected officials to tell them, to do something, to not do something, to share their opinion. So you could say, what I do is to gin people up. And I've been doing that for 20 plus years. I obviously, because of that, know a lot of people who were very personally affected by Charlie Kirk's passing last week. I do happen to work also in Republican politics and conservative movement politics, or what we call the freedom movement. And I'm not going to lie, Nicole, it's been a hard week. It's been a hard week. I just want to say I'm happy to answer questions people want to ask me about either what happened, the business, of politics, and that kind of thing. We don't, we can take the conversation where people want to take it.
Yeah, this is not a scripted interview. This is not a scripted discussion. I actually don't exactly know what we're going to talk about today, guys. And I prefer it that way, because one of the things I love about talking to Sue is she's articulate, she's well-read, she's spent time about thinking about things like this. And I don't know what she's going to say today exactly, which will make it fun for me because I'll learn as I go. And that's the thing about discourse, is you say a thing and then somebody may or may not agree with it, and then they bring up a point, and then you consider that point, and then based on that you may say a different thing, or you may change your mind. It may actually solidify your opinion that you brought up to begin with, or you may just be like, yeah, but I just think that because I think that and I want to think that, and you know that about yourself at that point. And so that's why I was like, yeah, that would be the perfect discussion, because that is basically what Charlie Kirk was doing. So
yeah. What was he doing, I think, is something people would like to debate.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem, is that we have very varying definitions in society right now of these very basic words like discussion, debate, civil engagement, fascist.
Yeah.
I don't actually think people are using a lot of these words correctly. It just, a lot of people who are using a lot of words, when asked to define those words, don't actually have the correct definition of the word. And so I think one of the things I think that this incident this past week has shown us is people people don't agree on literally what is the truth, right? What does the word mean? Did Charlie Kirk stand for? People definitely don't agree on that, right? And so I think, what does it mean to be happy or upset that he died? People definitely don't agree on that. What should happen to you because you express an opinion on that? People don't agree on that. So if you think about it, people don't agree on even the basic interpretation of what we would just call life or reality. And I think it's very difficult to, it can be very depressing, right? You say to yourself, how do I even have a conversation or go about my life when I feel like people fundamentally don't relate to me or understand the words coming out of my mouth as I intended them?
Right. And also feel a need to bring in whatever powers that be that they can to police what somebody else is saying, right? Where I was reported twice this weekend for abusive content to my email listserv provider for that email that I sent on September 11th. And I thought, like, it's one thing to disagree or just send me a note and we'll talk about it, right? But it's another, and then, or unsubscribe, like, don't like you anymore, don't want to see it.
Right.
But to report it as abusive, and then, like, nothing happens to me as a result of you doing that. If 400 people did that, something might happen to my relationship with that vendor. But like 2 people did it, and that's basically not enough for the email list serve to probably even pay attention for an email list my size.
I mean, I think the more troubling idea is, did those 2 people actually find your email abusive? I mean, again, it's about, like, they've defined things in such a way in their life, right? That these things that, maybe 99.99% of people don't use the word abusive in that way, but there are people who do, right? Was their truth. They weren't just trying to punish you. Like, maybe, I'm just saying, worst case scenario, they actually felt that way. And I'm not justifying that. I'm saying that's alarming to me, right? That we could have people that are so far apart on what is an abusive email, right? If we just asked 100 people out there, to rate something as an abusive email or something like that, we would get wildly different definitions of where to draw the line. And that makes it just it makes it very difficult for, I don't want to say to have sympathy for these things, but it makes it very difficult for the platforms, right? And the services that we use, whether that's Verizon, whether that's Facebook, they become by default sometimes the decision maker on that, right? And it
means we're ceding that decision to people who are making their money off of the advertising dollars they get on the platform, who basically, like, I'm sure the people who work there have opinions about things and care about things, but really probably what they care about more would be, are we making money or not here? Because we are going to go, like, the selfish motivation there is, do we stay in business?
And I and this is why I've had such a hard time this past week, because I myself am part of this industry, right, of ginning people up. I used to appear on a show called The Roland Martin Show. Roland Martin is a very prominent, very liberal African American, and my sole purpose on the panels, once every couple of weeks, was to be the opposition, was to be angry at what Roland was saying, right, is to fight him on live television for 2 hours in the morning. And I've been on other debates. I've been put on other panels to debate. I'm a commentator on CTV, which is the Canadian version of CNN, and they always call me, to comment on presidential debates or, other controversial things. And so my own career is based on this, right? Being able to be as opinionated and sometimes as argumentative as possible. And not to compare myself at all to Charlie Kirk, but, when I started speaking out about to my school board during the COVID pandemic, and I started making a lot of enemies. I used to tell people, I don't know if I'm going to walk into my local Starbucks and somebody's either going to hug me and say thank you, or they're going to literally spit at me, right? I mean, this is the punishment, I guess, or reward for having a platform, for speaking your mind, for being part of this industry. And the political industry, just to give people perspective, in 2024 spent $16 billion. In just 20, I would say 16, that number was in the millions, in the low single-digit millions. So we're talking about going 100-fold, more than 100-fold, 20-fold, in a decade, right? Less than a decade, in 8 years. So I think this is something to think about. Like, where does it come from? Does it come from the top down? Does it come from the bottom up? Right? And then what do we do about it, I guess, is the most important thing. But personally, I was very deeply affected, just because it just, what happens? What happens now, I think, is a question, right?
Yeah. Well, so when I was going to frame up this discussion, what I wrote, I'm going to read you what I actually wrote, is because I felt like I had to write. I've been writing in a journal a lot to just think about stuff. And I wrote, we're watching systems along with people drive society into the dehumanization and into division. The media is following its incentives, not the truth. And this has been going on for a very long time. If you read The Fourth Turning, we're due for a major shift if that pattern stays in place. And this is what can lead to widespread violence. And where I was going with that is the incentives of the media is to get angrier and angrier and more divided to get eyeballs. And I used to watch a reporter call one person for an interview and say, this other guy said this thing, and the other guy hadn't said that thing. And then that person would say something incendiary, and then he'd call the other guy and say what the guy said, and then he'd watch them fight, and then he'd have an article to write. And if that one person was doing that, I'm sure a lot of other reporters were doing that.
I definitely think, and this has been my opinion for a very long time, that media, the mainstream media particularly, has and is a huge part of our problem in society, for several reasons. One, the reason you said, because they're profit motivated, right? And I think the other reason is that journalism for a long time now has lost its sense of impartiality. We used to call them the fourth estate, or you think about it as they help balance power because they're the fourth pillar of government, right? And I think they've long, pardon the pun, broken the fourth wall, right? They have long ago decided, we're not just here to hold people accountable. We're here to make you feel something that we want you to feel. We are here to make you react. And those two things, they may argue, are the same thing, but I'm going to argue are very, very different things, right? I don't think Walter Cronkite's view of what reporting the news is the same as what CNN and Fox News think of reporting the news is today. And I argued, like, more than a decade ago with, I had a professor, E.J. Dionne, who is actually a very prominent Washington Post columnist. I had him as a teacher in a class in graduate school. And I said to him, I really think all journalists should be upfront and declare what their personal politics are, and that really all media is opinion journalism, that there's really no such thing as just straight up reporting. Because even by your choice of headline words, or where you place a story on A1 or A21, I mean, those are all opinions, right, of where something should be, how something should be perceived. There's no such thing as neutrality in journalism. And he very much took offense to that. And I remember having a huge debate with him about it. But I think that I still believe that, and I hold that true, is that a lot of people, we grew up to think, your teachers are neutral, education is neutral, college is neutral, the media, the newspaper, the evening news is neutral. None of that is neutral. We all know that. And so what the problem is, I think, to answer Margot's question here in comments, is what's actually happened. To some degree, I think what's actually happened is that we keep lying, especially to young people, about being an honest broker. And a lot of the people who are talking, and that includes public schools, colleges, they're not honest brokers. They're not, right? They're not. We've skewed everything, but we haven't taught the children how to deal with that. We haven't actually, that's okay as long as you accompany it with, I have an opinion and that's where I'm coming from. And you're also okay to have a different opinion. If every college professor or every elementary school teacher, says that as they're teaching, I think we'd have a much different world today, but they don't, right? They come across like I'll give you an example. Like, you're allowed to put a Black Lives Matter poster in a public school classroom. And I'm not here to research that movement, but Black Lives Matter is a political fundraising organization, the same as Turning Point, right? But just like the Southern Poverty Law Center is the same tax coded organization as Heritage Foundation. But for some reason, we think one is okay and they're the truth teller, and the other is this totally biased thing. Like, a teacher would never be allowed to hang a Turning Point USA or Heritage poster in their classroom, right? But by law, those organizations operate and are treated by the tax code and do the same things with money and fundraising. They're the same, right? And so, of course, I'm a little biased, and that's why I said at the beginning, I work in conservative politics. I'm biased in my opinion that we've tilted things too far. I'm okay with people having opinions, right? The point is, you have to be upfront about it. You have to be upfront. Right. And you have to tell people it's okay if you disagree with me.
Yeah. And
for those you have to be okay with that.
Yeah. So for those on the audio podcast, the question that Margot typed out was, what has actually happened to make people hate others for a difference of opinion? Is it just the ability to hide behind a keyboard and not have a face-to-face conversation about things? So something that occurred to me while you were talking, Sue, is that so when things went down last week and I was talking to you before we went live, I actually didn't want to talk about it until it had been about a week, because when something comes to a crisis pitch like that, the things that come out early are almost always not quite right. And so if you jump on the bandwagon of, this is the motivation of the shooter or whatever it is, you can be very, very wrong. And one of the first things that came out is they interrogated somebody who wasn't the shooter at all. And people assumed that was the guilty guy. And they were trying to figure out who he was and blah, blah, blah. And so usually I pull back. And that's because I think about things in terms of, this is a fact and this is an opinion. And the fact is something I can actually verify, that's not slanted to the best of my ability, whatever it is. Like, this is a light bulb. That is a fact for me. I can touch it. I can show it to you. And opinions are completely acceptable to discuss, completely acceptable to bring up. But it's important when you're bringing them up, I think, especially as a personality, to have a way for people to know, I'm telling you my opinion right now.
Right.
This is my opinion. And that opens up the door, I think, and you have an opinion too.
It should. Right?
It should,
because I'm sure people out there can debate you on whether that light bulb is blue or not, right?
Yeah,
and so
that is true.
I mean, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying more things are up for debate, and people have such wide differing opinions. That is, in fact, what makes our society great, right? That's what differentiates us from other living beings. That's what differentiates more so, the Western civilization and modern times from olden times. I mean, all of these things, are supposed to be good things. It's supposed to be progress, right? And things that we cherish about being human. And I think it's very difficult to think, how did I think that is, the ultimate question I've been struggling with is, how did we get here? What was my role in getting us here? As somebody who's made an entire career out of influencing people's opinions, right? And a lot of people, the one thing about the internet is it's made a lot of people really good at doing what I do professionally, just on the side, right? A lot of people have become really good amateurs, but much more effective at influencing opinion than ever. And again, you could say, shouldn't that have been a good thing, right? That gets more opinions out there, that, people get to share their thoughts, you get to know more people. But, what has happened is people thought they knew Charlie Kirk, right? From one side or the other. People thought they knew him. And to some degree, he wanted you to feel like you knew him, right? That's why he was out there. That's why he had a podcast every day. That's why he went to in-person events. He wanted you to feel like you could interact with him and that he was listening to you and that you could have a dialogue. But that also means there's millions of interpretations of what he means. And there's millions of people out there who can interpret it one way or the other. And so I think that's a big question. And I think for everyone now, I guess my plea is, we're all part of it, right? We're all part of it. It all matters. You can say, I'm not a politician, or I'm not, working in the industry like Sue is. I don't go on television. It doesn't matter what I do or think. But the point is it does. It does. And every single atmosphere that you're in, whether you're playing a video game online with people you don't know, or whether you're standing in line at the grocery store, it matters how you behave, how you express yourself, how you express yourselves towards other people. All of it matters, and I think more than people realize.
And when you're among friends, and so you feel like you can say something dehumanizing about whoever the other side is for you, you're sinking to the level of furthering the hate narrative. And the thing about this incident for me that really struck me was how far and how quickly the discussion sank immediately into dehumanizing the other side from both sides. And when we dehumanize the other side, it's okay to beat them up. It's okay to shoot them. It's okay to do all of those things. And when people start taking actual action on that can get, I'm not going to bring up the obvious example because we're going to try to not talk about that specific example because not everything has to be about that. But that can go horribly wrong to this, to scales of people being tortured and hurt and killed in ways that normally you and I wouldn't do. But among us are people who would do that. And they would feel justified because their opponent is no longer human.
I think, well, one, I want to circle back at some point in this discussion about mental wellness, because I do think there is something that I would like to say about that. But I think, as I was thinking about this whole thing, I know this is going to sound like a crazy analogy, but there's a really famous scene in the movie Devil Wears Prada where if and for those of you who I'm just going to quickly recap the premise of this movie, which I think almost everyone's seen, but just in case you haven't, The Devil Wears Prada is about Meryl Streep, who is presented as, you know, the equivalent of Anna Wintour, the editor of Vogue, and then Anne Hathaway is an intern who she feels like she's too smart to work at Vogue, that fashion is kind of silly, right? And there's a scene where they're looking at clothes on a rack, and Meryl Streep says to Anne, like, you think that you chose that cerulean blue sweater that you're wearing, and it has nothing to do with anything, that you had free will to choose that color blue. But what you didn't know is that, you know, and she goes into these examples, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, you know, Valentino or these other famous designers made that color popular on a runway, and that trickled down from our magazine to mass market clothes to wherever you found that sweater, and you didn't have a choice in picking that shade of blue, right? And I think, you know, this is true about, as much as that's like a comedic bit and we don't want that to be true, but there are people out there picking what you should think. And while you may think that you have free will to think those things, or that you came up with these ideas and you had free will to believe them or not, sometimes you don't. There's a bigger machine out there of people who are deciding this is what you're going to hear on the media. This is what you're going to feel. This is how you should feel if somebody else doesn't feel your way. This is what you should do. And I'm not saying that we don't have our own agency, but, you know, when we step back and we look at the machine that is communications and media, it's the same. It's the same analogy, right? And I think the more people are aware of that, you know, the better off you are to say, is this how I really feel? Would this be how I feel if I spoke to somebody else, a human? Would it be how I feel if I asked somebody who has a differing opinion, why do you feel that way? And be allowed to explain why you feel that way. Right? One of the things I hate about my profession, I go to a lot of conferences, and so I meet a lot of people on the other side of the aisle from me. And a lot of times I'll ask them, like, when's the last time you had a conversation with a real person on my side of the aisle? And I kid you not, you will have no idea how many times I hear the answer, never. Never. I said, so you've never just gone to a bar and seen an XYZ supporter, somebody you don't, and just had a conversation, and they've said never. I won't talk to that person. Don't encounter that person. I've never spoken to a outside of, it doesn't count to speak to me because I'm in the industry, right? But just a regular person walking down the street, I'm just curious. When's the last time you've spoken to, and these are the people controlling how you feel. Right? These are the people running the campaigns, writing the copy, writing the ads, writing, the emails that you get, the thousands of texts, the thousands of emails. These are the people writing them, people who have never in the past that they can remember spoken to someone with a different opinion. I think that's dehumanizing, like you're saying. I think that's you've now imagined, a whole society of people that you've never spoken to.
And it's not hard to do that.
It's not hard.
It's not just left-leaning who have done that to themselves, right? Where it's so hard to understand the other side at all because you've never spoken to somebody. I think it's a great exercise to find ways to interact with people with a variety of opinions, so you can see what they say and you can toss things back and forth. And sometimes the first reaction you have is horror because their opinion is so different than yours. Well, if that's your first reaction, your second reaction needs to be like, hold up. What's the core of what's driving them to that, right? Where is this coming from and how does it work? And so I'd say something that also struck me was I went back and I started looking at the videos that people who really hate Charlie Kirk have watched. And it's snippets from things he's said, sometimes pasted together with obvious edits that make what he says in that video completely different than and then you go back to the source and you see it was a completely different thing. In neither case was the person who's watching that video going to agree with what he said. But it was made to sound way worse than it was. and just sort of, but at the same time, then there's the other side clipping his videos in ways that make him sound
Exactly.
what they want him to say.
It's nobody knows him except for the people that knew him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you know, it's troubling that we can make that person the target. You know, it's one thing to fight ideas with ideas, but to fight ideas with violence is an entirely different thing, which, you know, where I think that's where, you know, a certain level of mental wellness in our society has to play a part in that, because there's just the recognition that some people can't tell the difference between an appropriate response to something and not. I think, you know, if we created the media and social media and digital monster that we created, we also have to create the services that help people out of those arenas that can spiral you mentally, right? I mean, I think we've grown one industry without growing the appropriate support network that is now required. So we've completely changed how people interact and think and build feelings, but we haven't changed how we service people, and I think that's a problem. I think that also requires a lot of navel gazing for people in the medical community, for people, again, in the education community, for parents. And again, I'm not blaming those institutions. I'm not blaming parents, but the point is we all have to evolve, right? As a parent, I've had to evolve. As a single mom, I've had to evolve with, you know, what is it my daughter needs, and how is she growing up in a time that's different than how I grew up, and all of those things. You have to change, and that's just all of our collective responsibilities. And I think, you know, I think we've fallen short on figuring out that puzzle. I think the pandemic did a great deal of damage to society from top down on a mental wellness perspective, and I obviously think social media does. I mean, study after study shows that it does. So, you know,
The thing is, if study after study shows that social media has a negative impact and you are on social media a lot, it's having an impact on you.
Absolutely it is.
So it's not just those people, guys. It's us here on YouTube. It's being served the things that make us angry or that make us engage, and then engaging with them.
I mean, it feeds you what you pause the most at, right? If you accidentally pause it on a video that you have no interest in and you set your phone down, you're just going to see 10 more of that video. Like, it, you know, we've all done that, right? And you're like, what? I don't want to see this. If I you know, and me knowing that, I'll say, okay, you know, I do want to watch a lot of puppy videos today. So I'll like purposely like run a puppy video all the way through. And sure enough, you know, 10 more puppy videos will show up next. But, you know, that's because I can think in an out of body experience about all of these things. Right. And I know how to work the algorithm because it's literally my job to know how to work the algorithm. And so I just think we haven't taught people, you know, enough about how to be aware of that, you know, from, you know, kind of a third person perspective, right? It's difficult. It's difficult to do that.
Well, it's especially difficult when you're emotional about it.
Yeah, right. And again, you know, the people who are best at creating content are the people who get you to have an emotion, whether that's laughing, whether that's, you know, getting angry, whether that's just, you know, you think something's really cute, you know, that releases a lot of dopamine, you know, releases a lot of chemicals in your brain. You know, whether you see somebody has the newest thing and you want, you know, makes you want it, makes you covet. I mean, those are all emotions that these things are designed to make you have. And again, it's, you know, for people who have addiction problems or people who have other mental wellness problems, like it's it's really hard to self-diagnose that and to get yourself out of that cycle, right?
So here's a question that I'm going to frame in a way that's not going to be anything other than biased, and I can't think of a way to do it. So when we run up against somebody who's brainwashed, because you know how this is, you start talking to somebody and you realize, oh, they're basically brainwashed and they're not operating as themselves anymore. They're either talking points or they've convinced themselves of some extreme view. And you encounter that. What can you do to gently guide them to somewhere where maybe they're open again? Because my experience is when I come across somebody who's like all in on a conspiracy theory or whatever it is, and the reason I say it's biased is I'm sure I get this way too. So just like,
No, I mean,
what can you say to bring people back or help them? Like, what should you do in that situation, especially if they're starting to take actions that are going down a destructive path? Like, I think of the guy who, when Obama got elected, sold everything he owned, moved to the country because he was sure that the economy was going to melt down, and it didn't. And he lost everything and ended up on the street for a few months until he figured out how to make money again. But he stopped working for 3 years.
I mean, I think we don't ask each other enough, are you okay? You know, how are you doing? What is it that you're feeling? What is happening in your life that you would like me to know? Because I think a lot of these conspiracies, these things, it comes down to, you know, masking over things that we are upset about in life, right? And I say that including myself. You know, I myself have, you know, emotional PTSD from a lot of things that have happened in my life. So I think it's just to acknowledge that humanity, and to maybe take it away from the controversial issue and just see that person, or try to see that person as a person, and try to get that person to see you as a person outside of whatever it is the topic is. It's hard when people can make their entire personality and their lives around a certain topic, right? And that's when we see extremism, or we see what people call far fill in the blank, right? And I think what they're really saying when they say someone's far left or far right or whatever it is that they see everything through that lens, right? Even everyday interactions. And I think it's important to say, do you have somebody that you can talk to about something other than this topic, right? It doesn't have to be me, but is there something else that, you know, we can settle your mind on and have a discussion about? Because I think it's very easy to like wake up and go to bed, and it's a part of it is our culture, right? We say you're successful if you're passionate, you know, you're successful if you're, you know, you have a plan, you're successful if you have your next 10 years mapped out, and that you are, you know, you eat, sleep, right, whatever it is you do. I mean, there was just an interview, I think in the Wall Street Journal or something, about this, you know, the new people in Silicon Valley, and they talk about how they prefer not to sleep. They sleep 4 hours. They don't eat. You know, this is why Soylent was invented, right? Which is a soy drink that you drink instead of eating food, because for those people, even having a meal is a waste of time. They're not coding. But this is the society that we've said, like, those people are going to get the venture capital funds. Those people are winning. And so we are growing our children to be that obsessive, right, about things. You know, people want to be Mark Zuckerberg, right? And it's, is it healthy? You know, is it healthy to do that? Not everyone can be Mark Zuckerberg. Not everyone's brain is going to work like that. I hate to, it's like kind of like saying, you know, not everyone's going to play in the NBA, right? I mean, it's just like, you're just not going to. It's not an insult if you're just not tall enough. You know what I mean? Like, you just can't do it. And I don't think we tell kids enough, no, you can't, you won't do that. Don't do that. Don't be that obsessed with it. You're not going to, we just don't tell kids like, that's not healthy, like that's unrealistic, that's entitled of you to think that. I think a lot of it has to do with how we're raising people.
I went to college with a woman who was heavily abused by her parents, like starved her, things like that. Eventually ended up in the foster care system. As a result, she was under 4 feet tall because she didn't grow, because she didn't get enough nutrition. And as you can imagine, psychologically was lots of problems, just lots of self-confidence problems in particular. And she was studying to be a music teacher. And I watched her so in the music program, you have to pass what's called a jury, where you sing in front of professors in a big empty auditorium, which is completely intimidating. And they're sitting there with notebooks, like writing down every mistake you make to talk to you about it, right? They do that on purpose to make you super, super uncomfortable, to teach you to perform through uncomfortable situations. But a teacher in high school who has self-confidence issues is going to have trouble being a successful teacher or doing class management.
Absolutely.
And they didn't pass her because they didn't, like, first of all, when she got nervous, she had a hard time performing. And secondly, they said they would never pass her because she should not be a teacher. And they told that to her face. And I think in today's world, that would be harder for them to do.
Oh, I don't think anybody would do that.
But she needed to hear that, and she had time to think about a different career path.
Right.
So that was hard for her. But it was way better for her than getting a degree, going out to try to work at a high school, and nobody was going to hire her. There was not unless she did a lot more self-work.
And I think, we shy away from telling people what is it, the work that they need to do, right? That it's and then we teach our children that when they do the work we ask them to do, they should get a reward or a prize, or i.e. a raise of $10,000 or whatever. It's like, no, I asked you to do that because you just needed to know how to do that for your job. Just because you learned it doesn't mean you get a raise, right? I think that all of it is part of the problem. I recently took my daughter to college and dropped her off at the dorm. So I'm an empty nester now, but I'm part of this Facebook group for parents of the class of 2025, which is obviously, people who have a child that graduated high school this past year, as I did. There's almost 200,000 people in this group, right? I had posted about, just because I felt like a lot of people didn't understand, about how we had worked for years to train a dog, to get a dog, and it went to college with my daughter as an emotional support animal. The dog lives in the dorm room with her, and I tried to explain this in a post. I was shocked, just shocked, at the number of parents who said things like, if your daughter can't hand college without a dog, she should never have gone to college. She should never have left home. Or, what's going to happen to her when that dog dies? Isn't she just going to not be able to handle real life? And so, in other words, this mental wellness device, this dog that we had spent a lot of time really thoughtfully and carefully training for this exact job, and my daughter, I've actually talked about this on the show, had a very hard time during the pandemic, had issues. She was self-harming, has been in therapy. This dog was a part of all of that therapy, right? It wasn't just something we threw on there as like, this would be fun for her to have a dog. And it has helped her tremendously. But I wanted people to understand it. But it shocked me how many parents did not understand mental wellness. And that made me think, gosh, how many parents can't recognize a child in need of mental wellness therapy? And not only can they not see it, they deny the things that may actually help that person. They think that that's ridiculous, that it's a weakness, that it's stupid, that it's just my daughter's spoiled. And, you know, of course, there's people who abuse all these rules with animals. I get it, right? But I worry about the children of these parents, right, who just just dismiss the entire concept of an ESA, or just dismiss the concept that anybody with a mental wellness issue should even have left home, right? I mean, isn't the whole point to find a way to help your child be able to leave home? And then I see the parents on the other side of the spectrum who are posting things like, my daughter has a cold, doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what medicine to take, or my daughter doesn't, you know, I mean, like, they're trying to micromanage, like, down to like what time of day the child takes a Tylenol. This is an 18-year-old who's now 5 states away, right? And the parents just cannot let go even beyond, what are they eating? You're not texting me photos of your food. I see parents post. I see parents who are tracking their child, you know, through a Life 360 app, which, you know, is showing their motion at all times and saying, do I, you know, how, if they're here till 2 a.m, do I call them, right? And so I bring that up to say, like, I think, you know, a lot of the times we see this violence, it's a young person. And you have to ask yourself, why isn't it a baby boomer? You know, like, why isn't it a Gen X person? You know, and I think that, as much as you know, that sounds like a joke, I think we really need to ask ourselves that.
Yeah, that didn't sound like a joke to me. It's a question.
You know, like, why isn't the mass shooter a baby boomer? They have just as much, if not more, access to guns and information, and more time to digest it, you know, and resources, right? To fly around the world, to, I don't know, buy a drone, to whatever it is, right? How come it's not those people? And I just, we have to do something. We have to do something about our children.
So do you think that in America right now, just our population is more vulnerable to the division campaigns that are going on than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Or do you think they're equally vulnerable and we're reacting differently?
I think they're more vulnerable because they have more information that they have access to that's not in person, right? I mean, we think back to our childhoods. You know, I had to ride my bike to go see a friend, to talk to them. You know what I mean? Right?
Mm-hmm.
People don't have to do that. I mean, we have friends that will sit in the same room now, and they prefer to text each other from the same couch than to, like, look over and say something to that person, because they're watching something and they're, like, commenting, and they type so fast that that's faster and easier. And, you know, it doesn't matter if the person's like 5 feet away, they're still going to text them, right? So I think in that sense, it's easier to get inside your head and away from real people, which I think real people is the only thing that can really help you out of a problem. I don't think we're going to, like, app somebody's way out of mental distress, you know, like, download this app, that'll be the, you know, like, I mean, look, do I wish that AI could solve these problems? It's not going to. You know, I mean, I really don't believe it's going to. But what I do think is the same is, I remember I've been a conservative since I was, I think, probably in 2nd grade. You know, I was a Ronald Reagan fan. I named my daughter Reagan. And I remember even at that point in the 80s that I was the only Ronald Reagan supporter in school in the 80s. And people made fun of me and thought it was weird to be a Republican. And so I think that hasn't changed. That's only gotten worse. And that's what's led us to this point, is to say some people are righter and gooder than others, right? And it's okay because the school environment embraces that. Our teacher embraces that by the things that she hangs on her wall. Our college professors now embrace that. There's us, and then there's weirdos, right? And I think that has been around since forever, because I remember it as a child in the 80s, right? And I think part of that is the problem. The teacher wasn't going to defend me. As a Reagan supporter, there was nobody. It was just me. I was 10, 8 even, right? So I learned from the very beginning, we're the minority. We're the weirdos. Even if we have 51% of the vote, we're still the minority, right? We're still abnormal, and the other side is they're the popular opinion. I think it's privileged. I think it's privileged for people to have grown up that way.
It's privileged, but also so the one difference I see from when I was in school, and my experience in school will have been different than yours, is that, Margot's saying different isn't weird, it's just different. So when you were on the weird side, when I was in school, it was the weird side or the minority opinion side. It was not the evil side. It was never discussed as evil, and now it's evil.
This is true.
Like that narrative is...
But you can see the natural extension of that. Like, in order to win now, we have to demonize each other.
Yeah.
On both sides. The
goal is to win, not to find truth.
I don't say that only one side demonizes. I don't believe that.
We saw a lot of examples of that in the last 4 days.
Like I'm sitting in front of these awards. Like, are these awards for doing that very thing? Right? I ask myself that, right? Am I just very good also at making some things sound really bad and some things sound really good, right? And I think, again, as much as that's how things are with media, we also have to teach our children how to digest it, right? How to be strong, how to have their own opinions. And I think we feed them stuff. We don't teach them how to digest it.
And this is why almost every post started with, initially, I didn't always agree with Charlie Kirk, which I refused to do that.
I refused to do that too. I felt that way too. I said,
if you know me personally, you've talked to me about what I think about things. But that post wasn't about me, right? It was about somebody else.
But it also shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
That's the point you were making. You shouldn't change your opinion of me or what you're about to read that I'm expressing based on whether or not the degree I agreed or you agreed with Charlie Kirk. It's that is the problem, right? When I see people saying that, it's like they're giving in to that experience I had as a Ronald Reagan supporter, the only one. It's saying, I'm so sorry. It's apologizing, saying, I'm so sorry. I don't want you to think that I actually believe all of this stuff. But the thing is, you shouldn't have to apologize for who you are or what you think in order to get someone to listen to you. You shouldn't have to conform yourself to what you think the mob wants you to think in order to be taken seriously. And it's horrible. People who don't recognize that is the problem, that is literally the problem, right? That we haven't taught people to be able to defend their opinions. That's fine. That's what Charlie was doing, right? But to just have them and that have a discourse with other people and to not say, well, automatically, because I know that you are going to have this opinion, I am not going to listen to you, or I'm not going to take what you're about to say seriously. It just automatically is a, X, right? Like, I'm not going to, if you don't denounce Charlie, I can't listen to whatever next is going to say. But this is only one example of that in society every single day, right? It's right. Just pronounced because of this week. But we do this all the time, right? We teach people that all the time. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why can't you listen to someone just as much who says, I believed everything he said 100% and more. However, I'd like you to hear my next sentence, right? I mean, it's difficult, right? And again, I'm coming from the place where I used to work someplace where I used to make ads that put X's over Nancy Pelosi's eyes, Okay. I mean, like, I literally, you know, like that was my job at one point. You know, and it's like, I admit, like, how did we get here? Right? How did we get here?
Yeah. I think the other motivation for doing that isn't just so you'll be heard, but it's preemptively keeping people from saying nasty things in your comments. Because people get so upset when people say nasty things in their comments, which I understand. I've had a lot of nasty things said to me in my lifetime in comments and on the phone and in email. Not, I haven't had as much as you, I don't think, but you're like me too. But for me, the result of that has been it did actually hurt my feelings early on, and now it just doesn't. Right? Like if
Yeah.
you, Sue Zoldak, say something mean and nasty to me, that's probably going to hurt my feelings. But random strangers on the internet.
And also, you know, people who have an agenda to make, they're communicating and making a point by being mean to you. That's beyond wanting to hurt you, but they're trying to make a badge of it for themselves, right? And I think, you know, that's a lesson that I had to learn quite a bit during the pandemic, because I was bullied relentlessly online for the things that I did and said during the pandemic. And it's hard. It's hard to be there. And obviously at you know, at any point I thought to myself, maybe I just need to stop doing what I do. Maybe I just need to not do this. Do I need a different career? Do I need to just be quiet? And I think that's an existential thought process that's going through a lot of people's minds. But I think, you know, for the people in the audience, I would love to know, like, what are your thoughts? Like, what can we do? I think the bigger question is, you know, what are the solutions to this? And, you know, I said to Nicole earlier, because I always come back to Nicole for this, because she is one of the best community builders that I know. And an in-person community, a real community where you know people, you know, IRL, as they say. And I definitely think I said to Nicole, if there's anybody I want to talk to about this, it's you, because I think what you do, you know, is what's holding, you know, you're the front line of this war. I think when people meet each other and do things in person, that changes people. I definitely think it does.
I think about it this way, Sue, where I interacted with people in a preparedness network who were very, very conservative, and I'm quite libertarian, which means there were points of disagreement, like big ones. And we would talk and we would disagree and we would get heated about it, right? But, you know, whatever. One day there was a piece of property for sale near me. I said, "Oh, there's this piece of land near me that's like, you know, cheap. Anybody want it?" And the person who I was always kind of arguing with said, "Well, you wouldn't want me there anyway." And I said, "Well, that's not true. We may not agree on everything, but your fundamental core beliefs underlying it all are basically positive for people. The reason that you have a different conclusion than I do, you have the same motivator, that you want people to progress and be more prosperous and have good, healthy lives, and you want your kids to grow up in a safe environment and all of these things. So actually, I'd love to have you as a neighbor." From the day I said that, he went from an adversary to more of a friend after that, because I don't think he had encountered people that he argued with that put that aside and were like, "Yeah, but your core person is good." Right? And I think a lot now the expectation is to assume things about people because they have an opinion about something in particular, and you assume underneath it all they're an evil, bad, manipulative person who's blah blah blah, whatever. I don't even know. But when we get in person and have conversations, it opens up doors like that.
Exactly. I think, you know, I have I have lots of friends across the political aisles, and again, that's partly because of all the conferences I go to and everything like that. I don't know if that so much would be true if I never left my house, let's say, right? But I have one friend in particular who was, years ago, not so much now, but really known in the liberal political spheres, and we're friends because we're both single moms, we're both raising children about the same age, we have a lot in common. And every time she would post, like a selfie of the two of us at an event together, smiling, like hugging, she would tell me that she would get hate messages. Like, how can you pose with Sue? How can you be friends with her? To the point where, like, she just had to stop posting pictures of me and her together. And that like, that's incredible, right? That's literally incredible. Like, we're talking, people are like, what could you possibly have in common with Sue? And she would say, we have more in common than you think. And she would name all the things that I've said and more. But people didn't buy that. They said they can't see it. But that's because they don't see us as people or mothers first, or single moms, or career women, or entrepreneurs, or all kinds of other adjectives that you could use. They just see us as left and right and saying you can't possibly want to have lunch with that person, or hug that person, or laugh with that person. And I think that's part of the problem. I think also I guess I should say there's a couple things that have touched me, in being online and reading all the things online and reading all the different media. And I know a lot of people are like, don't do that, but it's my job to do that. So I never, I never stop consuming media. And I'm that person that also reads all the comments on articles, because again, that's where I learn what people are thinking. I want to learn not only the vernacular, but people's thoughts. So is that painful sometimes? Like, is that like drinking poison? Yes. But again, I've trained myself to drink it because I have to. But all of that is to say, I saw two things that really struck me this week in the media. One is, I can't remember which newspaper it's in now, but I can find it afterwards and send it to you. But it was a post where they actually interviewed about 6 college students who were there in Utah on campus, and asked them, how do you feel? Are you okay? And I don't think we do that enough, right? It wasn't like, let me get your political opinion on this, kid, like, what are you going to do now? Are you going to pick up, like, it was just like, are you okay? What did you feel in that moment? How have you felt since the week been? How are you going to be next week? Some of the kids went home, asked their parents to come get them. Some of the kids, didn't move out of their dorm room for 48 hours, didn't eat. But some of the kids were, again, sought community, sought their friends, their sorority, their fraternities, whatever it was. Some people wrote, an op-ed. But again, it ran the spectrum. But the point is, I don't think we give these kids enough of a chance to just be people. And we assume they're not people because they're young. I think that's part of the problem. I think we dehumanize children, and by children, I mean up to people in their 20s. I don't think we take them seriously enough. We don't listen to them enough. And so that article really was, of all of the media coverage, that stood out to me. I said, this is the, everyone should have called a college kid that day and said, how are you feeling? If you know one, if you even not on that campus, but just anywhere, should have said, are you okay? How do you feel about this? How does that change your view of, the college experience, of things, that colleges teach you to love, which is open dialogue, debate, events. That's the reason you go to college, right? Is to have access to speakers that you wouldn't normally have access to in your everyday life. That's literally what you're paying for in addition to the classes. It's always more than going to college, is about much more than going to classes. We all know that. We didn't ask them how they feel now. The other article that really struck me, and I actually, if I can, I might read you a little bit about it, it was written by, I think it's the Star Tribune that is the Minnesota paper, and it was written by their former Republican Party leader. And the title of that article was "Mourning Charlie Kirk's Death Isn't Partisan." And in that article, it's, they ask near the end, so what do we do? And they write, there's two writers, we stop feeding the outrage machine. We stop treating social media like a substitute for civic duty. We stop dehumanizing our opponents and start humanizing ourselves. We do something real, tangible, local, kind, brave. We volunteer. We speak thoughtfully. We grieve with compassion. We show up. And I think that really encompasses what I hope is the message, right? I think, and they acknowledge in the article, just like I have, that, they're partially responsible for the climate that we're in, right? Being in the business of politics. But it's time for all of us to own up and say, we all have a role in like reaching out to people, doing something local, doing something kind and brave. And I think the point about civil discourse is important. Making an online comment is not civil discourse. We try to pretend that it is, but that's not being involved. That's not being involved in your community, or that's not being involved in politics. I want more people to be involved in politics. That's always been my driving North Star of why I do what I do, is because I think the more people we get involved in any issue, the better. The more people who are informed, the more people who have an opinion, the better. And I still believe that, even despite today. I still believe the more people who are knowledgeable about politics and involved and vote and go to debates and share their opinion, the better. But we also have to understand what civil discourse is. We have to understand what that really means.
Yeah. Well, and the more of it you do, or the more of those discussions you have, the more you realize that sometimes you're wrong.
Definitely.
Right. Because confirmation bias. I just saw a meme put out by such and such and, blah, blah, blah. Obviously that's true. And then Sue comes along in your comments and asks you a critical question. You're like, oh yeah, I'm wrong, or whatever. We haven't really worked with people on a large scale on how to have that conversation. The "oh, I'm wrong" conversation, right? Stephen King was wrong this week. And he didn't do a very good "oh, I'm wrong" conversation. And that's okay. That is what it is. But when you're wrong, like sometimes I'll put memes out there that are wrong, and somebody will say that's wrong, and I'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. And I'll update it and be like, this is wrong. And other people will say, why didn't you take that down? And it's like, because I was wrong. And now I'm showing that I know I want people to see that you can say you're wrong. And to me, it feels like hiding it to delete the thing.
It's not just admitting that you're wrong, but it's allowing people to change their minds or to evolve. Mm-hmm. To be a different person today than they were yesterday, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We used to give everyone in the company I worked for a Myers-Briggs test. And that sounds a little creepy, but I worked for a CEO who really believed in this and that it would help us work together as teams if we understood each other's personalities. But I bring this up to say that people don't realize that you can take that test, decades apart and be a completely different Myers-Briggs. And things like motherhood, death, divorce, all kinds of things can completely change who you are. People who are introverts can become extroverts and vice versa. But all those other things, there's people who, we would come across and they would take it and they go, this has got to be wrong because I've taken this test before and this is not what I got. And they think of those tests, a personality test, as something that's like stable throughout your life, like your blood type, but it's not. Right. And I think we don't acknowledge that enough, like to allow people the grace to change their personality for whatever reason, whether that's an internal soul searching, that's an external event. Very oftentimes it's an external event and you don't realize how much that impacts you. And so I think we don't we also don't think about that enough. If somebody frustrates you, somebody is, you feel like it's disappointing to you, people can be different, and I think it's difficult to understand that.
Yeah, I took the Berkman at an organization twice, 2 years apart, and the psychologist who goes over the results with you as a result, which is a very helpful part of doing something like that with a psychologist, is they can kind of help you interpret it, was shocked that I had completely changed. And she said, either you lied on the first one or something big has happened in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as near as I can tell, something big happens in my life about once every year or two. For the last decade, for sure, maybe 15 years. So as a result of that, you do react differently. So I think that's a really good point about the personality tests, because also the things you're doing day to day influence the parts of your personality that come out.
And it's sometimes, ironically, the people closest to us who are least able to accept change in you, right? It's your sister, it's your mother, it's your spouse. It's hardest to become different in front of that person, because that ultimately, a lot of the times, means changing the relationship you have with the people closest to you. And that's difficult. That's unmooring, right? Because that changes that person in effect. But I think, when we see people as these monoliths that we see online, on TV, in the media, we start to see each other that way. But they forget those people are doing it professionally, and a lot of times they're putting on an act, right? Like I always used to tell people, like, I just play, the bad guy on TV, right? I mean, that's my job. That's my job, to be opinionated, and to pull coals at people, or, to scoff at something that somebody says. That's literally, I don't talk to people like that in real life most of the time. I hope. I try to tell myself I don't. But I try to tell myself I have an actual different persona in real life than I do in those instances. Only Nicole, if that's true or not. But people forget that there's like a real person, and then there's like the person you see on television, right? Is Tucker Carlson the same in person as he is on television? Maybe he's closer to it because he's been allowed to be himself, right? He's been allowed to it, but not everyone is.
Yeah.
Not everyone is.
So where do we go from here, do you think?
I just think it's listening. I think a lot of people go back and forth and have a conversation, but neither person listens to what the other person's saying and actually reacts to that. They just have lined up a bunch of points that they want to make. And again, the irony is, when I media train people, that's what I tell them to do. I tell them, don't even react to what the question is. Like, don't react to the reporter. Just, here are the points you need to make, and you're just going to make them, right? You're going to make it work. So again, the irony is, we teach people that because that's the goal, is to get people to, you get your talking points across. But in everyday life, in real life, that's not how we should interact with people, right? But I think we're just so trained to do it. We're trained to do it online. We're trained to do it by what we see, and we mimic that in real life. We're not listening to that other person make any points. The other thing I think is, you have to just take everything and realize there's some things that are just out there on their opinions. And then there's, like, in real life, what do you care about, right? There's, what are you doing, and you have to separate those things, because it's the people who can't that are in trouble, right? It's the people who can't that end up doing these acts, right? And I'm not saying anybody here listening to this would do something like that, but the point is, that's where the danger lies in your mind, when you can't bifurcate like a real life relationship, and all you do all day is consume thoughts that are somebody else's thoughts.
Yeah,
and you make that more important than, it's the same as having a gambling addiction. It's the same.
Watching all of the division that went down right after that incident, and like an incident where I think the proper reaction was sympathy for the widow and horror, and this shouldn't be happening here, no matter who it was who got shot. And watching that meltdown, anybody who was outraged and clicking on all of those things got more and more and more and more of it. And their view of what's happening right now is that everybody is choosing a side and behaving this way, right? Because that's the algorithm. That's how it works. They're going to get served more of that. And LH says the algorithm is all confirmation bias until people learn how to fight and utilize the algorithm. I saw that stuff for like maybe the first day and just did not engage with it at all. And I haven't seen anything awful in 2 days now online. I haven't looked for it. I haven't seen anything awful. That means you can use it as a tool to program yourself to be able to go to the bigger picture and say, like, what's important about this versus what do I think everybody thinks? And it's much like learning whatever you can about AI tools to understand how they're influencing, right? How we work, how we communicate. When you get to know how to use them rather than fear them, then you actually like literally can see when they're being used everywhere. A. And B, you have a better idea of what the impact of the AI technological changes are on people's ability to think, people's ability to research, people's ability to communicate. And so I actually think that's a much more insightful comment than maybe even you knew you were saying, but it is like AI, a tool you can use, and you can use it to program yourself to have a more open mind.
I think it just goes back to, like I see you, Nicole, as someone who's really grounded because you don't live your life just purely off of what you see online. You live your life on real life responsibilities and real life people and caring about real life people and tending to your real life community. And I think if we all did that, we'd all be healthier. I think if we all had that, we'd be healthier, right? I see you kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum as somebody who just only lives in an online forum and doesn't leave the house and doesn't, interact with any real people, has the luxury of not having real life issues, such as, filling your pantry. And, like these are things that, are healthy things to put your mind to. Right. And there's some people who have the luxury of not having any real life things to put their mind to. Right. You can now order everything you need on Amazon and Uber Eats, and you can completely live, online. And obviously, yes, there's a lot of benefits to that, but there's also, again, I'm not going to say there's negatives to it. I think what we need to do as a society is to teach people, like you're saying, how to understand that and how to still live a healthy lifestyle while enjoying the luxuries of Amazon and Uber Eats, right? And being in an online Discord chat all day. And I'm not saying those people are default unhealthy, but the point is we need to teach people how to, again, like have a third party, like an out-of-body experience to look at themselves and say, what are the things I should, need to do to make sure that I stay healthy? Am I the best person, to be giving that advice? I mean, do I know I'm not a coach, I'm not a lifestyle. Those are definitely things, those are not my strengths. Right. So do I know how to do that? I'm not trying to preach that I have the answer to that at all. That's not what I do. But I do know that I sense that it's important, I guess is what I'm saying. I sense that there's a divide between people who recognize that they need that humanity in their lives and the people who completely ignore it.
Yeah, as things are becoming more digitized and more possible in digital world. And as the digital world can make a video, make Nicole Sauce say anything you want Nicole Sauce to say, basically, and it'll look fairly believable and sound mostly like me. The in-person is really critical. Like, I think now more than ever, as much as I like being alone on my homestead, the in-person is critical.
Right. It's not about liking it. I mean, unfortunately, you know, I always tell people, like, I'm an introvert at heart, but you would never know it if you saw me out in real life. Like, I am, you know, a connector. I love events. I am the person that, like, tells everybody where to go, you know. But that's because I've cultivated that persona, one, out of necessity, but two, because I enjoy the power it gives me, right? I get to influence people. I get to tell people where we're all going to dinner. Like, people are like, no, Sue's going to pick the restaurant, right? I mean, it's like, but my personality isn't like that. You know, in kindergarten, I don't think I spoke once. And I would always get these report cards to my parents that said, Sue has not spoken one time this entire year. And I know people who know me now would not believe that that was me, but it was, you know. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to raise my hand. But I think the important thing is I realized that I need to speak. I need to raise my hand. I need to be that person. I need to play the role of the extrovert. And so in the same way, I think people who prefer to spend their time online, they need to be taught the importance of doing something maybe that makes them uncomfortable, because people need that, and we need each other to hold each other accountable. I think someone brought that up in comments, is people hold each other accountable. You know, an online forum does not, social media does not, an app, as much as you want it to be, you know, your mental wellness app and keeps track of your habits and things like that, it really doesn't hold you accountable. Right? You can manipulate that app however you want. You could be like, I did go to the gym today, right?
No, this thing's yelled at me twice to get up and walk for 5 minutes.
Right. I mean, yeah, maybe it becomes harder when we have these, you know, digital personal devices like watches and rings. But, you know, it's like you could tie that watch to one of your goats, and it's gonna run your steps for you.
You can just shake your hand like this.
Right.
It doesn't actually fulfill your purpose with wearing the thing.
But if you were, let's say, trying to win a contest or prove something to somebody, I mean, there's many ways to do it. But the only people you really can't shy away from are the people who see you day to day, right? And I think that's important, right? I mean, I think people ask, you know, all kinds of questions. Are guns the problem? Or is television the problem? Are computer games the problem? And I mean, ultimately, people are the problem.
We're the problem.
We're the problem. So I don't know. You know, before guns were widely available, there were a lot more poisonings. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it just, right? I mean, you don't hear that anymore because that's like a medieval kind of way to kill somebody. But, you know, famous people had tasters that would like taste their food. I mean, literally, this used to be your security, right? So I think people are going to evolve to whatever is available to them. But we have to help people before it gets to that point.
And I think the thing we can do is help each other. That's literally what we can do now. We cannot control where this goes. We can be aware of risks when people are willing to be violent against ideas like that. If more people are, it actually can go very, very wrong. You and I can't control that, but we can control who we talk to, how we interact with them, and if we've empowered that person to feel loved, to feel successful, to feel a sense of their own purpose, whatever that purpose is, we can influence that person. And the more of us who can do that, the fewer people who fall for it, basically.
I think absolutely. And I think, you know, everyone can do something not only with their community, but with the children out there, you know, with the youth of this country. whether it's working with them directly, volunteering, reaching out to them, just giving them, you know, a place to be. I think, you know, it takes a village to raise these kids. And we're letting the wrong village raise them. You know, we're letting the wrong village raise them. You know, they're being raised by the people they play Call of Duty with, right? And I don't say this to blame parents. I just think it takes more. We all need help. You know, like you're saying, we need to help each other. We need to pay attention to the kids around us. We need to take them seriously. We need to volunteer with them, give them more access to real people. You know, make it okay for them to have relationships with people outside their generation. I think, you know, again, I just think that that's where the cauldron is bubbling, right, so to speak. That's where it is. And so, you know, they need an intervention.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, they do. I'm really glad we added SRF Youth to Self-Reliance Festival this time because of that. Because I was like, well, if we're going to complain about young people not being involved, we have to give them a way to be involved. You know, they actually want to be involved, I've noticed. So why not do it? I love how Joel Salatin thinks about the handoff. He thinks every child should have started their first business at about 8 years old, because at 8 years old, they're not so like into the early teen shy phase that they won't ask somebody for the sale, but they're old enough to do the math for the change. And then he's also like, if you want to have legacy planning, you need to have handed the keys to the business to the next person who's taking it over and trust them to make the decisions and be behind them 100%, much younger than people tend to do that. Like when they're in their 30s or 20s or whatever, like when they're ready, hand it to them and they're running it now. And now you work for them.
And I think, you know, part of our problem is we have young people that don't want the keys. Like they just don't want that responsibility, or they don't, you know, I talk to a lot of people who have never worked an in-person job. Never. Like not once. Went to college online. They took a work from home job. They have never been to an office. And again, you know, my own companies are virtual, so I'm not judging. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, I love our virtual, but it also makes me think, you know, all the time, like how I use this phrase all the time. How do you Zoom your way into the corner office? Like if you've literally never stepped foot in the office, is it possible for that person to become the CEO of a company?
Probably not.
But this is a question we're about to face down. We're about.
That's a good point.
We're there where like people want to retire, and the people who want to replace them have never worked in person. Now, that's not to say they don't understand what company culture is, or leadership, or strategy, or mentoring. I'm not putting, you know, all these layers of negativity on it, but it is a question though that we need to ask, because there is a difference between being in person and working from home. Okay, yeah. We all know that. If there weren't a difference, not all the major companies would be calling people back in person, because it's cheaper for people to work from home, right? Much cheaper, especially in where I live in Manhattan, right? So Goldman Sachs, if they thought they could make more money, you know, by closing their tower and letting go of Citibank, if all these people, you know, Meta, Twitter, headquartered here, Google owns a building that spans an entire city block, the long ways from avenue to avenue in New York, not the short ways from the numbered streets, from 8th to 9th Avenue. Okay, you go in one side, you're on 8th Avenue, and you go out the other side of Google, you're on 9th Avenue. Have they let go of that building? They have not.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to ask ourselves, if it was just about the bottom line, if they thought this is much better for everyone, I mean, you think they just want to hang on to a city block in Manhattan? I don't think so.
Yeah, we know they don't.
You know what I mean? As much as that office is really fun, and they have scooters that take you that you can scoot yourself from one conference room to another for speed, because it's too far to walk from 8th to 9th Avenue. It would take you 10 minutes, right? And sometimes you don't have 10 minutes between meetings. So there's literal scooters. But I worry. I mean, I think it goes back to what you're saying. I worry about the people who don't do the things that you do, like have a community around them.
And the only way you get that is to do it yourself. Like, you can come to my stuff and that gives you the opportunity to build your community. Because that's the other part. People always ask me how to build community. We've been giving people opportunities to be here in free ways, in ways that cost money, in ways that teach you things, in all sorts of different ways.
Yep.
And when you get here, talking to people and continuing to talk to people afterwards is how you build community over time.
People do ask that question quite a bit, I think, both from your audience, from my audience. How do you build up a network? I built up a networking group called DC Media Peeps. I started with 40 people. It has over 2,000 people in it. And people say, how do you do that? And the thing I tell everyone is, you have the ability to do it just as much as I do. You have people that are connected to you through the things that you do that have similarities, and you just do it. You just put it out there, and you start with the few people, the 10 people and then it becomes 12 people, and then it becomes 22 people, right? And it doesn't matter. You don't have to start with a lot of people, but you have to tend it. You have to give people a place to gather, whether that's in person or online or both. You have to give thought leadership to it. But the thing is, whatever you do, you are the thought leader already. You already are a thought leader, right? You just have to think of yourself that way. And so everybody listening to this podcast is an expert in something. You literally are. You're the top expert in whatever it is you do. And so, and the way that you specifically do it. That doesn't mean you have to find people who are exactly like you. I mean, the whole point of networking is to find people who are similar, but maybe not exact. But you can be the center of any network that you want to be. And I think that power is important for people to realize. And, does it take a little bit of work? I mean, everything, farming takes work, right? And that's what this is, right?
Same. It is literally the same.
It's literally the same. Okay, I'm not going to tell you it's easy just because it's easy to put up a website or a Facebook post and you're like, well, nobody read it. Well, I didn't think anybody was going to come to my first networking group either. And like only a few people came,
Yeah, the first time's always like, yeah.
It's like you have to believe in it. And if you believe in it, then other people do.
Yeah. So LH says, we're building a market on our property and my 9-year-old is chomping at the bit to participate. I have a vendor booth at Self-Reliance Festival. He's bringing stuff to put out. Laura, you should check your inbox for the refund of your booth fee, which still means you have a booth, but we made the decision over the weekend because of the need to build more community. Vendor booths are free for anybody at SRF. You just have to go on and buy it for $0. You do need to have your ticket, but we realized people were feeling the pinch this year. And I know you guys thought long and hard before you spent money on a vendor booth, but yeah, I'm excited. I didn't know her son was involved. That's even better.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So cool. Okay. Well, last thoughts before we wrap up. We've almost been going 2 hours, Sue.
We always talk a lot, and we haven't even talked about us,
Yeah.
which no one wants to hear about. But
you need to come stay at base camp so we can just hang out. I
know. I want to. I want to come. I can go and live anywhere now.
Yeah.
I can just be wherever I want to, because I'm now an empty nester, and it's. Well, as much as I'm sad about that, as anybody is who takes their freshman to college, I'm also, I can work from anywhere and be anywhere. And I told my daughter at some point, like, what if I just like go on a round the world cruise and like just sell everything in the apartment, right? And I don't live anywhere. Like, I would love to do that. In some ways, it's cheaper than living in Manhattan. So,
yeah. Well, I know somebody who did Airbnb studying for a while. They just a month at a time in an Airbnb in a different town.
Yep. No, I mean, there's a whole industry for digital nomads, that caters to people like that don't have a permanent address.
Yep. Awesome.
So yeah, maybe I'll be down.
Cool.
I appreciate everyone who listened or who will listen to this. You know, it's been a difficult week. I think what keeps me going is that knowing there's people out there who still want to connect in real person, people like Nicole, people like you guys. And, you know, it allows me to think about something other than myself and what I do, which is, you know, it's been a hard time. It is a hard time. It's going to be a hard time. So
it's a hard time. Guys, thanks for listening to this today. I hope we answered the questions you had and have helped you think about things also critically from your side a little bit more. And if I could say one thing, just this is a good time actually to go introspective and look at what's around you and really invest in the things that matter. It's a good reminder of that. So do that, and we will see you tomorrow evening at 7. I'm live with Midwest Preparedness and Kentucky Sustainable Living for a Great American Preparedness Tour. So with that, go out, make it a great week.